Welcome back to another episode of the Pit Lane Yappers. I'm Mox.
I'm Rosie, and this is our Canadian Grand Prix recap, take 2.
Actually, I think it's take 3 because we had to stop recording 3 times. But it's okay.
Well.
We're back. Before we get into FP1 and the practices, Lance Stroll was confirmed to be driving for Aston Martin after his wrist surgery. He had a special helmet, and Haas had a special livery for his is it 200th Grand Prix?
Mm-hmm.
Their 200th Grand Prix, and it's Aston Martin's 100th Grand Prix, and it's Yuki Tsunoda's 100th Grand Prix. I think that's it. That's all the records.
Yeah, I think so.
So, now on to the weekend.
Someone had a much more exciting weekend than me. So.
But going into FP1, nothing really happened until Charles crashed.
I would like to say nothing happened at all, even.
I will say, though, it didn't seem like that big of a crash. And then, they drove by. First of all, the medical team drove by us, and I was like, oh, it triggered something. And then they drove by with the car, and I was like, oh, that car is ruined. It was bad. But yeah, the other Ferrari was also struggling. It seemed like everybody was struggling this practice.
Yeah.
Because it's a temporary circuit, they didn't have a lot of grip. Lewis was spinning. Franco was spinning. Kimi was going off. George was going off. Everybody was going off.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, everybody was going off almost every practice session. And Albon was impeding quite a lot of people. Bertoletto and Lewis got impeded by him, and then Fernando got impeded by him. Fernando was not happy, but, the commentators were like, wow, Fernando Alonso sounds angry. And Fernando was just like, oh, what is Albon doing in the middle of the road? That was not Fernando angry.
Well, any gossip.
Yeah.
Gossip.
But speaking of Williams,
They were both fast.
they were flying. They had a pretty good free practice and then just went downhill.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, Alex Albon.
Poor Alex. But FP1, yeah. Alex
Max?
and Carlos, yeah. Max P1, and then Williams P2 and P3.
Yeah.
I was like, this is gonna be a really good weekend. Maybe I'll get a Williams podium.
The ghosts of teammates.
So that takes us into FP2. It was announced that Charles would not be driving. But, I feel like out of every practice session, P1 and P2 is where you don't want to drive. Because P3 is when they try, the racing setups.
Yeah.
So, everyone's like, oh my gosh, Charles isn't driving. And I was like, yeah, aren't you happy he's not driving in FP2 and we'll be back for FP3?
And Charles is, he's been here before, so it's not a complete loss.
Yeah. But we did get a crash in FP2. Lance Stroll, I will say Lance Stroll, it was a tap on the wall.
Yeah. And then his car fell apart.
His car fell apart.
Which, personally, if I was designing a car, I would design it not to do that, but...
Welcome to Aston Martin. But yeah, I remember seeing that and being like, that my dad was like, should it have had that much damage? And I was like, no, it should not have.
Your dad is so cool though. I love your dad.
Thank you. I do too. But, Lewis was struggling again, but so was everyone else. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
once again,
I've
everyone.
got here that the McLarens were struggling, which is obviously notable because
It's
they're
McLaren.
the dominant car this season.
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of crazy to see how, not bad, but how slow the McLarens were right in front of me. Because I was like, wow, I'm going to get another dominant McLaren's, like, sessions, and it was not that. And I was like, oh, okay.
Very interesting.
But I also think a lot of people, like, including myself, were preparing for a downpour and rain and it being kind of cold. And let me tell you, Canada, I have never gotten such bad sun poisoning in my life. You probably can see it on my lips right here. I have sun poisoning all over my body from the sun. So I have a feeling McLaren was not expecting it.
That would low-key only happen to you though.
Yep, in Canada, get sun poisoning.
So.
But while everybody else was struggling, do you know who looked really good?
George.
Both of them, George and Kimmy.
Both.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they were both fast. So
They were like,
again,
it was kind of like, I was kind of shocked to see how, I don't want to say comfortable because they both said they weren't that comfortable, but how comfortable they seemed versus the rest of the teams. They might not have been as comfortable as they thought they would be, but versus like Lewis and the Williams and, you know, Franco and everybody else, like, they looked very comfortable.
it was quite nice to see, to be honest.
Yeah. I was like, wow. And I will say also, not Aston Martin, Mercedes was like, we built our car for a track like Canada. And I was like, that's a weird thing, like, track to build it for. Because Canada's kind of like one of the few that are not like other tracks. But they proved it.
Well, the thing is, Mercedes should focus on building a car for Silverstone.
Mercedes should focus on building a car that's universally good on every track.
Well, yeah, but they haven't done that for a while.
But FP2 ended with George Russell P1, Lando Norris P2, and Kimi Antonelli P3. And Fernando Alonso P5!
FP3, we have the return of Charles, thank God.
And can I just say, so I was in the paddock for FP3 in qualifying, and I got into the pit. I saw Lance's car, which was basically just the shell of his car, and I was like, oh, he's not racing. Like, his car was falling apart.
Well.
But don't worry, everybody, he did get to race. But nothing really happened in FP3 until Oscar hit the wall of champions. And then right after him, Nico spun at the exact same spot. And he's like, whew, I got lucky. I don't know how that happened. And the Sauber engineer, his engineer was like, yeah, you got lucky.
Yes, well.
But I will say also everyone was hitting there.
Yeah, but when Oscar hit the wall, that triggered the red flag. And then, in the end, it results in Yuki overtaking Oscar, which meant that he got... Shaking your head.
No, I agree. I'm just saying I can't, like,
Oh,
the FIA can't stick to one rule.
so Yuki got a 10-place grid penalty, which is crazy.
Crazy. Because, like, it's also, like, if you watched the overtake, he wasn't going so fast that,
Yeah, and also he was like the other side.
yeah. What did they want him to do? Park? Like, Oscar
And,
wasn't
like,
moving.
You can't like crawl along.
Yeah. But talking about the other McLaren, Lando did not look very comfortable the first two free practices, even though he did get P2 and FP2. He just didn't look very comfortable in the car. And he finally looked comfortable. So did Charles. I don't know if they did something overnight and changed something for them, but I was like, okay, finally we're getting drivers a little more comfortable on this track. Also, Isaac spun, and I don't know if you heard his radio message.
No.
He spun, he's like, oh, sorry, I don't know what I did, I'm so sorry. And the engineer goes, no worries, we're trying, we're all trying, that's all we care about. I was like, oh. But we all know how Racing Bulls treats drivers, so we'll see how long that lasts. But in the end, it was Lando Norris P1, Charles Leclerc P2, and George Russell P3.
Both.
But that takes us into quali. This is when we found out Yuki got a grid penalty. Crazy.
And Hadjar got one as well for impeding Carlos during practice. Quali was pretty boring right up until
the end of Q1. Yeah, Alex Albon, his engine cover exploded.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, is the answer to that. It just...
Like, I wish we had more of an explanation of why.
Not his engine,
we don't.
Not his power unit, not his brakes, his actual, like...
Cover.
It
went...
Just, it's the equivalent of someone's car bonnet just...
Yeah.
Bye.
And that let out the red flag, and that kind of messed up Lance Stroll's strategy. They weren't doing their strategy that usually Aston Martin does, which I was like, oh my gosh. They heard me say to Meg when I was in the pit lane, if they even think about doing a one flying lap, I'm going to lose my mind. They were scrubbing tires, however, so I was like, what is going on? Lance was finally on his flying lap, and the red flag came out, so he had to, obviously, bring his car back into the pit lane. However, after the red flag was taken in and it was green again, Alonso flew. He went P1, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am so excited. Right in front of Susie Wolf, I almost burst into tears. That would have been really embarrassing if I started crying because Alonso went P1 in Q1 in front of Susie Wolf. Thank God I held that in, but... the drivers that were out were Gabriel Bortoleto, Carlos Sainz, Lance Stroll, Liam Lawson, Pierre Gasly. And everyone's like, oh, poor Carlos Sainz, like, he's never not gone out, never gotten out of Q1, like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, this is not his home race. Let's talk about Lance Stroll, who got screwed over by the red flag at his home race.
Also, he's in a Williams, like...
Yeah. But Alex Albon made it. Even with his broken car. So, that leads us to Q2. The first... once again, nothing big happened. Commentators... I will say, I have 2 notes, and one of them says, commentators saying Alonso is flying, and I could actually cry.
Yeah, but really...
No one understands the struggle.
Happened in
Yuki,
Q2,
though, in the pit lane, I think it was, like, the second time they all were going out. He was in some part of the pit lane, and George went flying by him. And Yuki came immediately onto the radio and went, yep, that's a penalty for speeding for Russell. And they were like, yep, we've already reported it. George only got a fine. But I thought it was so funny. I was like, wow, Red Bull team really...
They just snitch, and they just
Yeah.
don't like George.
I mean, I think I would also snitch if I was Yuki and, like, knew my teammate was Max Verstappen. Like, I would be snitching, trying to get up as much as possible. But, like, it's just so funny. It's just George. They all just snitch on George. The man who's the head of GPD... What is it?
Well, the drivers... No, the GPDA, the Grand Prix Drivers Association.
But the drivers that were out in FP2 were Yuki Tsunoda, Franco Colapinto, Nico Hülkenberg, Ollie Behrman, and Esteban Ocon. I was kind of upset about Haas. I was, like, really hoping for a good race for Haas.
Well, it was better than Williams.
Oh. Q3, Alonso was in, everybody. We need to just note that. Fernando Alonso did the impossible. He was in. Also, I noticed all of practice, Max was quiet. There was no complaining. There was no, like, commentary. He was just basically quiet. He was like, I don't have brakes. I don't have grip. But, like, that was it. And I was like, I wonder if, like, Red Bull was like, okay, we need to quiet down because you have 1 penalty point left. Like, we cannot risk it. Also, McLaren did not have a good quali.
No, they were struggling. But do you know who did have a good quali?
George Russell!
And I've said before, the G in George stands for GOAT.
He got pole position, and then it was Max P2 and Oscar Piastri P3, which I know we just said McLaren did not have a good qualifying. Everyone was expecting Piastri on pole, and Lando Norris qualified below an Aston Martin.
Is this the same front row we had last year as well? Again, their beef makes it interesting all over again.
Also, I don't know who was doing the post-race, the post-quali interviews. I think it might have been Nico, but could be completely wrong. But they were asking George, like, what are you going to do about Max being aggressive into P1? And George went, well, I think I have a few more penalty points that I can play around with.
He's not wrong.
He's so funny. He's so funny. But that takes us into race day.
So it was announced that Lawson and Gasly would be starting from the pit lane due to both a power unit change. Lawson is now on his last power unit. And when they were doing the grid walk, they go up to Colapinto's car and they're changing the brake discs right there on the grid.
Likely. But can we also mention how Lawson had a 50-place grid penalty when he was, like, he qualified, like, P19?
I don't understand the point.
I was like, oh, he's starting all the way back into Barcelona. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, like...
It also wasn't, like, for an extreme... Like, I'd get it if it was, like, oh, he hit a marshal, or he, like, threw something at someone and hurt them. But, like, it was literally, they were just changing his car when they weren't supposed to.
Like, what is he supposed to do about that?
Anyways.
He just drives it.
Yeah. But George had an insane start.
It was gorgeous.
So did Kimmy. Overtaking Oscar before turn 1.
Yeah, whatever, I guess. Yeah, okay, fine.
That was an insane overtake.
The child did very well.
But also into turn 1, Alex flew through the grass.
Yeah.
No, they didn't replay how he ended up on the grass. It just showed him go.
He just kind
of. And by fly, I mean he flew.
Like
he was airborne.
Off the floor. The commentators were saying that he shouldn't have rejoined the track like that, but I'm not really sure what he was supposed to do.
Yeah, like what? And Lando did get above Alonso, but Alonso was like, yeah, no, this is not flying by me. Not happening. And he took it back. It was a beautiful overtake, mind you.
And then to be honest, like the first few laps were like fairly normal. And then lap 13 is when everybody started to come into the pits. Like Max pit, George pit, like all in succession.
Well, Max pit because he's like, I have no grip, these tires are horrible. And so he pit. So everybody else had to pit. George was pitting to not have the undercut from Max, but then everybody else was pitting because George, they were like, oh, we can't have an undercut from George. So literally, like, the entire top teams were all pitting except Lando and Charles.
Ferrari.
So Lando and Charles led the race they led the race pretty substantially for a while. And I will say I was surrounded by Lando fans, and there was this guy like maybe 2 or 3 seats behind me, and he's like, what are McLaren doing? And the guy's like, no, McLaren's got it, they've got it figured out. And the girl in front of me was like, no, they don't. And I was like, are we sure we're talking about McLaren now, or are we talking about Ferrari?
Well, lap 13 is also where we have to say rest in peace to that groundhog that Lewis obliterated.
Literally obliterated.
So sorry, King.
Yeah, and he was married. The groundhog was married.
Yeah, it had children, probably.
It was so funny because 2 hours, like, before the race, he was trying to get the groundhog to come up to it because he had food, and then he hit it.
It's your friends who stab you in the back.
But, nothing really happened until lap 38 where Max pit again.
Well, I mean, Charles was arguing with Ferrari, but that's nothing new.
So did, I will say Alex Albon was also fighting with Williams, but like, he was like, why don't you guys ever listen to me? And I was like, oh my gosh, this poor man is gonna have gray hair by the end of the season. And then Alex DNF'd.
Yeah, I mean,
I rewatched the race because I was at the race listening to like the French English commentary and nobody was telling me why. So I rewatched the race. They just were like, okay, and that's Alex Albon out. And then I was like, okay, let's like look up why. Still don't know.
It was a power unit issue, I think.
Oh. Poor Williams.
Which is another Mercedes power unit problem.
Don't.
But yeah, everybody started pitting again. They pit George to avoid the back mark traffic, and then Lando had caught up with Oscar. We're like lap 40 something.
Wait,
now.
before that, lap 39, Kimi pit, and this is also where Lance overtook Pierre. Beautiful overtake in the hairpin, right in front of the Lance Stroll grandstand. And then Pierre goes off onto the grass, and he goes, he pushed me off. I don't know what's wrong with this guy. And Lance got the 10-second penalty. Mind you, he was already P18. Okay? What did you want the man to do? Anyways, then that's, like, the lap after is when Oscar was caught up with Lando, because they had 2 different strategies is what I was seeing.
Then Oscar kept getting stuck in traffic, so it slowed Oscar down. So Lando
and McLaren was like, yeah, Lando, you have the faster tires. But that's all they were saying. And he's like, okay, am I passing him? Is there a team orders? Like, what are we doing? And then Will Joseph came onto the radio at, like, lap 60-ish. So they had, like, a good 20 laps of, like, them going back and forth because they had traffic behind them. So, like, Oscar would overtake, and then Lando would have to wait for the next blue flag to overtake, and then he'd catch up to Oscar, and then Oscar would overtake again. So, like, Lando was right behind Oscar, but then, like, the slower cars would be in between them sometimes. So lap 60 or, like, 61 to one of those, Will Joseph came onto the radio for Lando and said, hey, we're not doing team orders, but we think you can overtake Oscar within DRS range because Oscar doesn't have DRS to Antonelli. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, I get telling both drivers, okay, we're going to let you race. Like they did in Monza last year with, Imola with Ferrari. One of the Italian races, and they, like, it was horrible. They lost the podium because of it. Or saying, like, hey, Oscar, we're telling Lando how to overtake you. You might want to speed up. But, like, just telling Lando that and not telling Oscar anything.
Yeah, I mean...
What?
It's interesting.
I will say, Red Bull Racing is anything if not messy, because when that radio aired, they tweeted papaya rules.
Did they?
I was like, oh. But I leaned over to my dad and I was like, do you know what would be really smart is if Toto Wolff told Bono to tell Kimi to slow down to help Oscar without saying, hey, we need you to help Oscar.
The Piastri-Antonelli Norris battle was going on. Liam Lawson retires.
Still don't know why. Apparently commentators, I was reading an article, mind you, this is from an F1 journalist who, we all know how reliable they are, but they were like, they think they're saving his PCU for Austria because it's their home race. Don't know if that's true.
Well, yeah, after Lawson retires,
that's the McLaren.
The gap between Oscar and Antonelli is now a lot bigger. And Lando is on the radio saying, do team orders because then I can overtake him. And they say, we're not doing team orders, overtake him yourself, essentially. We'll tell you how, but you have to do it.
I will say, I think that tells you who McLaren backs. Because I feel like if it was very obvious they were going to favor Lando in this championship, they would be like, Oscar, let Lando go.
Yeah.
But they don't want to tell Lando, okay, we're putting Oscar as our first driver. So they were like, just race.
And then, well, Norris does try to overtake Oscar himself.
He went for a gap that wasn't there.
To
be fair, he did almost overtake Oscar in the final corner.
Yeah, he overtakes him.
But then on the straight,
and then Oscar, brakes.
Oscar was like,
And then, there's the wall, there's a gap, there's Oscar's car, there's a big gap.
Was there a gap between the wall and Oscar's car?
Wasn't a car?
Or was there just grass?
It wasn't a car-sized gap.
Yeah, and basically Lando tried to take the small gap and hit the wall. Completely took off his front nose.
His whole front wing, not there.
And his car was... Yeah. And the commentators were pretty nasty on the track. I don't know if they were the same as yours. They were like, Lando's... this guy was like, Lando's pretty dumb for that. He's not a rookie, he should know. And I was like, whoa. Whoa. Literally used the word dumb. And I was like,
Well...
Okay, when you're racing, you go for a gap.
That's the French for you.
Was there a gap? No, but sometimes it's just instinct. And I will say, Lando owned up to it immediately. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say this brought out the safety car.
Yeah. And I will say, though, Lando, they came on the radio and they were like, Lando, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, sorry, that was me. That was a stupid move, my mistake. Like, he immediately owned up to it. And then people were like, yeah, Lando's so dumb for that. Like, he's got to own up for it. And I'm like, did we watch the race?
And then
the post-race interview, literally Lando went to Oscar and he's like, I'm sorry I ruined your race. And Oscar was like, no, you literally ruined your own. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And then the safety car, race finishes under the safety car. George and Max are beefing each other.
George Russell!
But George wins.
Yeah. George won. Max got P2 and Kimi got P3. Kimi got his first podium. Mercedes, if you happen to be watching this, just know, I was at Silverstone when Kimi Antonelli won his first F2 race, and now I was at the race that Kimi Antonelli got his first ever F1 podium.
Aston
Just
Martin,
saying.
if you're watching this, we love you.
Yeah. Aston Martin, I'm your number one. Actually, I'm probably not the number one, but I'm up there.
Mark's had a lovely...
I'm very close
Mark's
to it.
had a very lovely weekend, thanks to you.
Yeah.
And it's helping...
But that was not the end of the race. The end of the race happened, and then the penalties started coming. Literally half of the grid got noted for safety car infringements. Nothing came out of that. They all overtook under the safety car. Nothing came out of that. In the race, where they're all very close together, yet during Q1, when everyone was slow, Yuki Tsunoda got a 10-place grid penalty for doing the same exact thing.
Yeah, I'd be murderous.
And then also, Red Bull sent a protest to the FIA saying George Russell was speeding under the safety car. I think Red Bull should just really accept that George Russell will always come out on top. And everybody was like, oh, Max is such a baby. He doesn't like when he doesn't win. He's reporting it. Meanwhile, Max was in the post-race interview and he was like, yeah, George and I were both confused with what we were doing. He was trying to keep up with the safety car and keep the pace. I was trying to overtake because he was slow, not realizing the safety car was slow.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah. And then they were like, do you know Red Bull protested George's driving? And he's like, I'm sorry, we what? He was like, what? We did what?
The thing is,
why?
You can't go toe for toe with George when he knows it's his job to know the rule book inside and out.
Yeah. Also, it's really funny to me because George and Max might be the most rivals on track, but just hilarious beef off track.
Oh, just also
He lashes out.
with regards to the podium, they McLaren had to tell Oscar where to go because he hasn't been... The only time he's been off the podium this season is Australia and now Canada. So he didn't... They had to tell him where to go with all the other drivers. What?
That's just hilarious.
So...
He was like, I don't know where to go. I've been on the podium for so long, I don't know where I'm going. Like, that's kind of iconic of him. But yeah, that was the end of Canada. Can we, who are your winners and losers?
Winners is Mercedes. Losers, McLaren.
My winner is specifically Kimi Antonelli because I think he drove how Total Wolff saw him and why Total Wolff signed him. And my loser is Lando, not because he didn't own up or it was like an immature act or whatever, but it's like that was the last thing he needed in this championship fight because now Oscar is very far ahead.
22 points.
But like, people in my stands were like, "Oh, there goes Lando's championship," and I was like, "Oh, didn't know we were in Abu Dhabi. That's nice to know. Congratulations, Oscar Piastri." Like, they're so dramatic.
I wish. You know,
But
Lando fans would not last a day being a Leclerc fan. Not a day.
Lando Norris fans would not last a day being a Fernando Alonso fan.
Yeah, but like...
A previous 2-time world champion who's now like, hey, can we please pit?
Yeah, but...
Hey, I know you forgot about me out here. Can we please pit?
Like, I know, like, usually when you see the world's most ridiculous, like, headline from a race, and you think, oh, I wonder who's that happened to. It's usually Charles. Like, oh, my drink.
That's true.
Oh, my drink is all over my face, and the cockpit is full of my water, or my drink's just not working.
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah.
Also,
it was so funny. My dad, when we were watching them get into the car and put on their helmet, he's like, "Oh, is that for water?" And I'm like, "Yeah, unless you're Charles, then it's for drowning."
Yeah, exactly.
And the people next to me were like, "Oh, don't." They were both Charles fans, and they were like, "We are in hell. We are in hell." And I was like, "Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry about that. I had to."
Yeah.
But, also, some news came out today about other tracks. Thailand has committed some crazy amount of money to get an F1 track into Thailand.
Alex!
Signed it with Alex Albon. I'm so excited if Alex gets a home race. And South Africa seems to be very close to getting a track.
Well, South Africa, yeah,
and now the big question is if you could have any track back into the calendar, what would it be? And I was like, give me Hockenheim.
Are you joking? Bring back Spa.
Oh, speaking of Germany, before we end, Sebastian Vettel was at Harvard. He completed a certification course. This was not a degree. He did not get a college degree from Harvard, as much as TikTok wants to believe. He got a certificate. He did a 4-day class for sports business and management, and there has been rumors that Helmut Marko might be on the outs with Red Bull.
Isn't everyone...
And they're looking at a younger, more experienced person to take over, somebody who knows the brand and might know the sport. Sound familiar, right? Sounds familiar? And he just happens to go from his farming course to Boston, Massachusetts, to Harvard to take a sports management class.
I'll tell you something. I didn't know Harvard was in Boston until I came and visited you.
But that was it for Canada.
Yeah. Oscar Piastri.
Next is Austria.
See you then.
And then it's Silverstone. It's Rosie's turn. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I will be at work the entire time, but I will be watching. And I will be going, where's Rosie? Where's Rosie? So.
Thank you.
Everyone stay tuned. Bye.
Bye.